Congressman Inglis, you said that sustainability is a continuation of profit, but what if the continuation of profit involves harming something else that might run out in the very distant future, or it'll harm our world, but the profits won't stop? What do you think of that? Do you still think that's sustainable?
Yeah, the definition that Carlos Gutierrez gave me is definition of sustainability is making a profit. So if you can make a profit, then you can continue on a business. If you can't, you can't. And so that, I think, is just the way the world works. If there's something we're going to run out of, then you hope for innovation to a replacement for it. But the beautiful thing we've got going right now is that if the opportunity we have is that if you just force a recognition of the negative externalities associated with the incumbent fuels, then the market will solve it. I firmly believe that. Now, eventually some of those, something could run out among some of those alternatives. For example, natural gas could run out at some point. It's an alternative to petroleum that's better than petroleum. It'll run out at some point, though, too. But the market will move along at that point.
I need to say something about that. The Amherst 7 is so smart. I meant to say this when I first got up there. How should I phrase this? The sustainability is guaranteed by profit is bullshit. Can I use that word? And you used it in your own speech. You talked about how conservatism meant that you have to take into account, what did you call it, the costs, that negative extra, whatever that stuff is. Look, in the short run, that's the problem that's why we're in this mess. In the short run, people are making a profit out of destroying the planet. They haven't taken into the true costs of what they are doing. And besides, that doesn't take into account all the tax laws and the regulations that are a complete it's not a market. There is no market. It's all artificial. People make money because of a tax law. They make money because of a regulation. They make money because they're destroying something that can't be replaced in the future. We have got to get to a society in which sustainability has nothing to do with profit.
Let me respond to that. Yeah, all those things you just talked about. All those things you just talked about, Bob, are the things you want to attach to the price of petroleum and coal.
We're not doing it now.
I know, that's the thing. That's what we want to change. That's what I hope everybody here is in favor of changing.
Let's take the next question.
Congressman Fellner spoke about taking care of that miner or whoever could be out of a job, and I'm curious about the details of how we could do that given the state of Social Security and the unemployment rate.
Well, first let me say, we live in the richest country in the history of the world. We can do this. We have the riches to do that. Second, if you want to just get practical, the first thing I'd look at, and if you notice, all the candidates who said cut the deficit, everybody says, well, what are you going to cut? Nobody had an answer. Well, I'd bring the kids back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and we'd have if you take into account the future costs of those wars, by the way, and I happen to be chairman of the Veterans Committee in Congress, we're talking about, as a Nobel Prize winning economist just revised his $3 trillion war to a $5 to $7 trillion war. We can do this. You could do it through Social Security, you could do it with a cash outlay, you could do it with the, what I call clean air incentive, not a tax. That is, this is within our ability as a rich nation to do. Jim, you told me there's about 175,000 miners. If I multiply that out, it would cost less than these wars are costing us, certainly. It's relatively easy, given the scope of the problem. the scope of the problem is what? Annihilation, or loss of the planet, loss of a species, whatever. A few billion or even a few trillion compared to that is not very great, right? But if we have to do that to get the political will, I think we just do it. And it's not a forever thing. I want to retrain people. They'll feel better about those miners who were in there for generations, and they can't think of. It's a pretty dangerous thing.
Okay,
Most of them would love to get out of it.
Let's
pay them for it.
We need to move to another question, Barry.
Can I just say one thing about this whole business of sustainability? I come from a part of the country where logging is a major, or was a major occupation 20 years ago. And we decided we were going to start saving our forests, save our old growth forests, and save the environmental species that are protected by that kind of forest. We've done that, and gradually those people have been transitioned to other kinds of employment that have made it possible for them to exist in a decent fashion in our society. What is required is the will, the political will, to take care of something called the common good. If we don't take care of everybody in this room, if it all is about me, then you are lost. And if it's about you, we're lost. But if it's about us, we will find a way. And I think that's what Bob has said. We found it in the 30s, when this country was upside down. We found a way with Social Security and unemployment insurance and welfare and all the aspects that went into place. But over the course of years, we sort of lost track of that and decided, well, we can do it by ourselves. It's all individual. And Ronald Reagan said in 1980, in his campaign, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? That was absolutely the wrong question. It is, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? And unless we start talking about we, and all of us are in this together, we are lost. And I think that's the fundamental way we deal with the miners in West Virginia. I mean, you can't just throw away a bunch of people. You got to figure out a way to keep them in the system.
Hi, I wanted to ask a question in terms of this Congress coming up, and Bob had mentioned it, a couple of people have mentioned about the Democrats throwing out the progressive alternative before they ever get to the table. Now, this time in this Congress, isn't there a possibility of building a coalition with libertarians who, with the war, for example, with Ron Paul, used to sign the things with Dennis Kucinich. It was the two of them every time. Now Ron Paul's got Rand Paul with a whole group in there. Isn't it time for Democrats to be smart and stand up for progressive bills and say, no, we need this. By the way, the planet could burn up. Something simple, easy to grasp like that.
Yeah, when I said forget about Washington, that was basically for the movement, as it were. We still have an obligation to do stuff. And you could still, and I agree with you. I mean, me and Dennis and sat down with Paul and a couple other libertarians. We realized we agreed with the five most basic things. Get us out of imperialist wars, civil liberties. I was trying to think of what it was amazing that it was a populist program. I think that's the answer for the Democratic Party, by the way. That is, we have become, we have the guys on Wall Street running our economic plans, we have the Republicans running our war policy. I mean, we haven't done, what the hell do we stand for? I'm not sure. You know what, I'll just give you one example if I have time. You know what, anybody here know what the Tobin tax is?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, Tobin was the name of an economics professor from Yale. I think he died recently. He said, we can get rid of income tax, property tax, sales tax by taxing at a very, very small amount, 1/10 of 1%, all of the financial transactions that go on every day around the, from it's really betting on currencies and commodities and these derivatives. If you take out the stock market and mortgages, which have some basic asset there, all the other stuff is just betting. if you tax that at 1/10 of 1%, because there's trillions of dollars per day, you get rid of all the other taxes. Why doesn't the Democratic Party become the party of no taxes? That's the kind of thing I would do. He's the tax expert, though.
I would suggest that you go home and Google the Progressive Party platform of 1910, which is where Theodore Roosevelt came from. A Republican. And in there, he proposed unemployment insurance, and he proposed all kinds of things, including an inheritance tax, and a lot of other things. It is what I expect is going to happen here if the Democratic Party and the Republican Party don't start dealing with these progressive ideas. There is going to be the emergence of a third party, because we cannot have a sustainable society where now we have 2% of the population having 26% of the wealth of the country, and the rest of us are scrambling around at the bottom, where it was only 9% of the wealth about 25 years ago. It's increasingly the wealth is moving to the top, and it all has to do, that's why we're fighting this climate issue, along with a healthcare issue and a lot of other issues. We have lost the idea that everybody has to have a chance. And it's going to happen, and you will all be a part of it, because when you come out of college, you think you're going to get a job, right? There's 12,000 or 12 million people right now without jobs, who have educations, who are sitting out there, and you're coming out of Wesleyan College or wherever, and you aren't going to have a job. You are going to be interested in how to make this economy work for everybody. And you're going to have college debts to pay off, some of you. Maybe all of you got your folks paid it all. But most of you, I suspect, have some college debts. Where are you going to pay that off if you don't have a job? So that whole issue of how you deal with climate change and jobs and social justice in the society is going to emerge again. And I would encourage you, I really think Bob's right. It is going to be a movement that's going to happen. That's what it was a progressive movement that gradually created the Progressive Party.
I might say, if anyone's interested in the Tobin tax further, Michelle Chan on the Friends of the Earth staff will be doing a panel, and she's a real expert on international financial transactions and all sorts of corrupt money that moves around the world and so on. Next question up there, Barry, across the way.
So I have a question that's going off of like the Amherst 7 question. So when you refer to the sustainable businesses or whatever, are you referring to anything being sustainable? Because you mentioned using natural gas as an alternative to like fossil fuels, but it's like a pretty shitty alternative, but Halliburton makes a ton of money off of it every year. So, or are you referring to like if we are to enact green, sustainable things, that in order to make like the public aware of them and actually adopt them, that we need to provide incentives for them and actually have it be profitable?
There are various ways to go about creating some changes. One is through a mandate. You can do, for example, cafe standards. That's a mandate where the government says you got to have cars like this. I've voted for those. It's not the most elegant way to go, though. Another way to do it is through tax incentives, and those get fairly complicated because anytime, as a CPA once told me, anytime you hear the word phase out, just know that you just added a whole bunch of pages to the Internal Revenue Code. And so those are fairly complex ways of getting to something. The most elegant way to deal, I think, with this whole topic that we're here today on is just force an all-in recognition of all the cost associated with the fuels. When that happens, the market starts sorting it out. And if you go to a real third world country, which I've had some opportunities to do as a member of Congress, those countries really do struggle with basic necessities. And if you gotta design, you gotta realize our leadership role in the world to take all these assets we've been given and to turn them into something good. You can't expect many true innovations to come out of people who have nothing. You know, as a capitalist, I'll tell you a definition of communism. It's he who has nothing wants to share it with you. And that's a real problematic system in my view. You really don't want he who has nothing sharing it with you.
From each according to his need, to each according to, from each according to his building, to each according to his need.
Yeah, so we have some real diversity of opinion here, as you can see. But on this, what you can find is a real agreement. Because I'm here to tell you that the thing that I'm talking about, this revenue neutral carbon tax, you know, is something that Art Laffer and Al Gore agree on. And you know, if you can span from Art Laffer to Al Gore, then can't we bring America together? And a key word that Jim McDermott uses is a common good. It is very important to figure out a way, whether you're conservative or liberal, to pull together for the common good. And so when Art Laffer goes to visit Al Gore, they both live in Nashville, and they talk about what I've just described as revenue neutral carbon tax, and they come to agreement. That really should be a great signal that we can do this, and that we can come together and solve it. As Tom Friedman likes to say, you know, his book is titled Hot, Flat, and Crowded. Even if you don't buy that hot thing, just pay attention then to the flat and crowded. And you'll get to the same place, and you'll make some environmentalist day. And if you don't mind making their day, just go ahead with the other two reasons. That's sort of a concept of common good, just moving forward in something that will get us all to a better place, regardless of why you're doing it. Maybe it's just that you want to make money as a solar installer. I guess we were just talking to somebody about solar installation. In South Carolina, the price of kilowatt hour is about 7 or 8 cents. Good luck trying to sell somebody on a solar system. It's just not there. The numbers aren't there. Now you can do it for taxes, you can give a tax incentive, you can maybe do a mandate, but the coal electricity doesn't have all of its cost in there. Attribute all those costs to coal, and suddenly some people start selling solar systems. And so that's sustainable. Then you've got a guy and a lady with a job putting in solar systems for a willing customer.
Add on to what Bob said. When I was a kid, and when Bob Filner was a kid, gasoline was 19 cents a gallon, right? How did we get gasoline for 19 cents a gallon? Well, we never paid the costs. And we haven't been paying the costs. And the oil from the Middle East, if you add in the Defense Department costs to protect our ships in the Red Sea, or the Persian Gulf, excuse me, the Persian Gulf, you have got a huge cost. So if you went to the pump down here at the corner and it was $9 a gallon, you would start to say to yourself, I think I'm going to find some other way to get around. Or I'm going to find some way to cut how much of that gasoline I use. But our government has, by its tax policy, given you every break to keep gasoline at 19 cents a gallon. I thought when it got to $3 a gallon, people would be jumping up and down and screaming. It's now $3.16 in Seattle, and nobody's saying a thing. They're just driving in, filling up, and going on. So it's got to go to about $6 or $7 to get people's attention.
Back there on the right.
I cannot speak on behalf of everyone in this room, but I do want to call attention to the people who are not in this room. I want to ask you guys questions about youth in the inner cities, youth in poverty-stricken areas, who are in their school systems not talking about environmental sustainability. They're not talking about these things. They're talking about consuming all they can get because they don't have anything. What are your roles as congressmen to fight this? Because without them, this whole environmental sustainability bit is not possible because they make up such a big population and we can't leave them behind. So what do we do to that? What do we do about that?
You're back to the movement idea. As in this country, the folks who vote run the operation. They elect the three of us. And if they don't vote, they don't get involved, they almost don't exist in the process, unfortunately. They get whatever is left over at the end of the day. And my view is that activism of getting people seeing that they can impact the world in which they live is the real issue. And it's true. It's not only true in the inner cities, it's also at the universities. People in the universities this year didn't vote the way they did 2 years ago, and that's why we got the elections we got. About 250,000 more votes, and we would have elected a Congress that would support the president, not one that's going to oppose him every single day. So it was only 250,000 people out of 300 million if they had showed up. But they said, what difference does it make? It won't make any difference. And that's what the movement's got to do, is mobilize them to see that they have power. And that's what Martin Luther King did, and that's what Gandhi said it best. Gandhi said, you must be the change you want to see in the world. And that's really, until people understand their own power, they are simply ignored.
But I think the answer to your question is also what this whole movement has to do. You cannot do it without the people you're talking about. I mean, we're all in this together, as Jim said. And this movement has to be inclusive. And I mean, I happen to be the Caucasian in Congress that has the most colorful district. So when my district is 85% people of color. So I walk into this room, it's not like my district. And this move, you know, it doesn't necessarily reflect the movement, but it's, you know, what do I say, 95% white. The movement itself has got to change and include the people and the needs and how they see the world and what, you know, the material needs and also, you know, intellectual and how the schools have to be structured, on and on and on. But you have to include that in the coalition. There has to be those elements of the society in the coalition that demands change.
Over on that side.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to thank you three for being here. It's really wonderful to have the opportunity for us to speak with you. And I'm interested to hear what you think. You know, taxes right now are obviously like very low, you know, historic low points, and yet they're still incredibly unpopular. So I'm curious what you three think needs to be done to make the notion of another tax at all politically viable in Congress. What needs to be done to get other congresspeople, excuse me, to sign on to that, and what needs to be done to get the American public behind it?
Well, let me see if I can talk you out of the premise of that question, which is that I don't think you pay too little in taxes. I think, if anything, you pay too much. 40 cents out of every dollar you make in taxes, federal, state, and local, is just too much. That's what it is. Help me remember Bill Clinton's economics advisor, the lady. Laura Tyson. No, before that. Anyway, she was testifying one day, and I asked her, you know, 40 cents on the dollar, do you agree that's the appropriate, do you think that's an accurate number? And she said, yes, it's an accurate number, federal, state, and local. This is Bill Clinton's Office of Director of Office of Management Budget. Yes, Alice Rivlin, that's it, yes. Alice Rivlin said, yes, that's the correct number. And then I asked her, Dr. Rivlin, do you believe it's an appropriate number? And she said, yes, I think it's about right. Because, yeah, I just think that's, just think about it, 40 cents out of the dollar. The kid in the inner city is facing a minimum wage for his prospective employer that the employer cannot pay for that unskilled labor. And so they don't hire him. And his parents face 40 cents on the dollar, a lot of it in payroll taxes, by the way, which is, I don't know what happened to these Democrats and why they went along with Ronald Reagan in 1986, by the way. It's a funny thing that happened there. The payroll tax went way up. And that's what I'm trying to drop in this revenue neutral carbon tax, by the way, is payroll taxes. Reduce those so you get a boost in employment. Then you have opportunities for that inner city kid, and you actually are reducing those taxes. Now, we have some inefficiencies that have to be addressed in the way the government does business, and you all know it. When you go into a government office, you set your clock in 30-minute intervals, right? When you go into McDonald's, you set it in 3-minute intervals. You expect McDonald's to deliver something to you in 3 minutes. And if you don't, you're frustrated. Yeah, well, it's not it's fast food. It may be not the best, but I'm not here to. I'm actually a sort of a health nut, so my colleague back there and my daughter will tell you I almost never been in McDonald's except for coffee, great coffee. The point being, there are tremendous efficiencies we could get out of this system, right? And I know this is well off the topic, but just to show that there are also conservative who are thinking about this, is there's an inefficiency in the healthcare system when you have this scenario, a guy, a home builder, 5 or 6 employees, hires a lady, did not check out her husband, should have had him parade before him so he could evaluate his health. Turns out he, the husband of the employee, has kidney disease, needs a transplant. This home builder just lost the lottery because now his claims experience is through the roof. He's going to have to drop insurance on himself and his own family and everybody in the business because he just can't afford it. That is a strange system. And so I believe as conservatives, we should accept the challenge of figuring out a way to get everybody covered. If you do that, then you can eliminate the cost shift that creates all kinds of inefficiencies. So what I'm looking for is not more taxes. I'm looking for ways to drive efficiencies in the McDonald's 3 minutes way rather than the government 30 minutes way. And that's what you got to figure out how to do.
He said the problem with the healthcare system. It's because it's based on the profit, but that's okay. Everything you just said, Bob, counters what your premise was in your talk. That is, the real costs have got to be figured out, whether you're talking about taxes or anything else. And besides, not everybody is paying 40% in taxes. Bill Gates ain't paying 40% in taxes. ExxonMobil ain't paying 40%. We give all kinds of incentives for everybody to locate abroad. Meanwhile, the coffee that you just loved, I doubt if it's fair traded coffee, and it comes from somewhere they're paying $1, a day to do it. The real costs are not in that. So your tax argument falls in the same thing. I mean, if we are getting as a populace, if I had to pave the road in front of my house and the sidewalk, and I had to have a cop and a fireman and what is the cost of that? I'm doing pretty good with my taxes, I would say, getting all those services, because you're not taking into account the real costs. And if everybody was paying their fair share, I think we'd have a reasonable tax structure in this country. So the answer to the question has to do, first of all, by the way, as I said, the premise of my speech was, don't worry about convincing the Congress people, convince the people. And if we have to convince the Lions Club that what we are talking about in my clean air incentive, not tax, is actually going to, in the long run, it's more profitable, it's more healthy, it's more sustainable, and it's cheaper, therefore. And we got to convince them. And we have to have the arguments. Every one of us has to become expert on this. And most of us are not, including myself. We have to be able to put it in a way, especially where these Republicans and his friends, the Tea Parties, no, his non-friends, the Tea Party, can't come back to us and say, oh, you're being too complicated because you think the average person can't understand stuff. I mean, they just dismiss any complicated argument. We all have to become economic experts, and we all have to become PR people. We have to be able to frame those issues. We don't have to all do that. We have to have people who will teach us how to do that. But we're not making the arguments as a movement in ways that will convince the majority of the people, because the opposition comes back, more taxes. We're paying enough in taxes. I mean, even the most intelligent of the Republicans came back that way. We're paying too much in taxes. I think if you defined it differently, it would come out differently. And we haven't figured out how to define it in a way that makes sense to the average person or even to the average politician.
Barry, we have time, I'm told, for one more question. So this will be the last question.
Hi there. I'm here from Canada, where the biggest obstacle for us taking action on climate change is the development of the tar sands, and the U.S. is our biggest customer. So as long as there's demand, we're on pace to keep massively developing this resource, even though James Hansen says you've got to leave it in the ground. So what I'd like to know is, what is your position on the development of the tar sands, and especially the KXL pipeline that would bring much more supply down to Texas?
Tell us what our position should be. We trust you.
The Northwest is pretty close to Alberta, and we see the pipeline and all the talk about it. My view is that it ought to be the last alternative we look at. We ought to be looking at alternative energy from a variety of sources, whether it be biomass or geothermal or solar or wind, or there's 1,000 ways, burning garbage and making methanol. There's a whole lot of ways that we could be dealing with this. I think we, in the long run, are going down if we go down the road of somehow we're gonna have to keep oil coming in, we are gonna be destroying ourselves by what we're doing to the environment. And we've got to get off that. We've got to get off destroying the environment. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to live here because of the chaos we're going to have in terms of water problems and flooding and windstorms and weather changes. This is really a climate question as much as anything else. We are having tornadoes and windstorms of proportions we've never seen before. And so we've got to stop polluting the atmosphere with carbon that is ultimately going to destroy our way of life. So I think we ought to be looking at alternative energy sources which don't do that. And so my view is, why would we want to put a pipeline in and bring more in and bury our head in the sand? Not to pun, but the fact is that's what we're doing. Denial is the biggest problem this country faces. What is facing us, everyone wants to deny. It's going to affect somebody else. It won't be here in my area. It won't affect me and my family. And we've got to stop that by stopping those kinds of projects. We had a project in the Washington State. They were bringing oil down from Alaska. They wanted to run a pipeline underneath Puget Sound and bring it up and made it, well, it was just wonderful. We live in an earthquake zone. What in the world are you talking about if you want to have a pipeline laying on an earthquake zone when you look at what happened in the Gulf? You want to create the Gulf by intention? By laying a pipeline through the earthquake zone? So we stopped it. It was called the Northern Tier Pipeline. We stopped it. That's what you have to do with this stuff, is just stop it.
Jim McDermott just mentioned a key word, which is denial. And I think he's exactly right, that this is a real challenge. And Foreign Affairs Committee one day, this lady named Ann Coren of Set America Free Coalition, some of you may know of her, she was testifying. It's fascinating to watch denial from both Republicans and Democrats in what she was trying to say to us. She was saying, you have 3% of the world's proven oil reserves. OPEC has 70%. Change the game. It was fascinating to watch Republicans, Democrats, as the question started, both asking about, what about the tar sands? What about the oil shale? What about in the Gulf? What about the Vulcan reserves? Fascinating, back and forth, Republican and Democrat being confronted with this truth that Ann Corn was telling us, which is staring us in the face and saying, you are an oil wimp. And we didn't like it. You're confronted with the truth that you are an oil wimp. We Americans are not used to we're not used to being called wimps, especially in some resource or something. So she tells us this, we don't like it. And so we go into denial. That's one way to cope with it, right? And to come up with something else, tar sands. It's more economically feasible than the oil shale. The oil shale thing, my goodness, you got to send all this water, you got to divert to Mississippi, you got to dig up Colorado, feed it through a oven, and then you can get the oil shale. And that's our solution? I mean, why not change the game? And so what I told her, I said to Ann Corn, you know what? It's like this. Because of this Scottish skin, you know, I go to the beach and I immediately turn into a lobster. And so, you know, bright red. And so I have now come to the beach and I've set up, and wouldn't you know it, here comes the lifeguard. And he is a handsome fellow with beautifully tanned skin, and he is coming right to set up right next to me. The comparison is not good. But let's assume I'm not good at this, but let's assume I was good at baseball. Let's try to get off of this, beach and get to the baseball diamond. Because maybe I can beat him at baseball. I couldn't actually. Let's assume this is America's pastime, that's our game. Get off of the sands of the Middle East and get to the baseball diamond and change the game. Our game is innovation. And innovation is driven, again, by sustainability, which is driven by people actually making a profit and delivering to customers their vital needs. We can do it.
One last thing. I want you to build the pipeline and send us the healthcare system.